All right, I think we're alive just about now, just kind of waiting on things to confirm on my end. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me this evening. Uh, just kind of getting started right here. We're going to live stream the latest updates out of Ukraine, kind of review what's going on the front lines, and some of the things have been hit and damaged and destroyed, as well as the politics and the situation around the international front and everything going on there. And overall, we got some things to talk about today. It's so just kind of settle in. Let's go ahead and get relaxed for a minute or two here. Gonna start off with something a little bit different today. I'm going to take a look at the situation at the Texas border for just a moment. And the reason I'm going to do that is because Republicans in the United States have tied Ukraine aid to border security. Well, the situation there in Texas, therefore, bears directly on Ukraine aid. So while people are getting in, I'm going to go ahead and touch on this just for a few moments. So this won't be a major part of today's report, but I wanted you to kind of be informed as to what's going on. My goal is to be as neutral as possible and address this in as straightforward a way as I can without pointing fingers or calling names. The migrant crisis over in the United States is becoming more acute, according to Crimean Wind. This is footage of Operation Lone Star, which is carried out by the Texas National Guard on the orders of Texas Governor Abbott. The map that they were showing just a moment ago, in fact, shows the where the states that are supporting Texas in their operation here. So I'm going to back up just a moment here, and I'm going to discuss what all's been going on. The Texas has taken over Eagles Pass. I believe it's a park. Eagle Pass is one of the major illegal crossing points that the United States government has been using to deal with illegal immigrants for a while. So the Texas government has taken over that location. They brought in their Texas State Guard, their Texas National Guard, I should say, and their Department of Public Safety officers to control the situation. They've installed barbed wire on the border with Mexico. The U.S. government pitched a hissy fit. They said this is not Texas's role in government, and it is not their role to control immigration. And they demanded that Texas surrender the location, Eagles Pass, and that they remove the barbed wire. In fact, at several points, the U.S. government has rolled in with bulldozers and removed or lifted up the barbed wire to continue letting illegal immigrants through the pass. Well, the Supreme Court, this is coming to a head right now as the Supreme Court has said that Texas must allow the federal government to remove the barbed wire. Now, the order does not say that Texas can't keep installing more barbed wire, and I'm a little bit fuzzy on exactly whether it orders Texas to surrender the location itself. This whole situation is a bit crazy. So Washington now has ordered Texas to stop this attempt here, and basically the fight is on. They gave Abbott until 1 o'clock today to surrender the location. No word on exactly if anything's happened since then, although it's been reported that the Biden administration has shut down oil terminals, that said, new oil export terminals that are being built in Texas. So overall, the situation is going to be a tense one in the United States. Now, that's kind of the summary of what's going on at this point in time. The rest of it is that 25 other states, mostly Republican-controlled states, have signed on to a letter supporting Governor Abbott in the state of Texas in this action. And Abbott himself has declared that this is an illegal invasion of his state, and called on other states to support him in controlling this situation. The invoking of this law is going to be an interesting one for the courts to take on. This is a law in the Constitution, and Abbott is a lawyer himself. So they're definitely working something there, and I'm not going to make a call on the merits of this situation. Overall, though, we've now got a situation where Texas is effectively telling the U.S. government, get lost. If you're not going to do it, we're going to do it. And we are not going to listen to the Supreme Court, at least in this matter, which sets some interesting precedents. Is it a full-on insurrection or rebellion? It could turn into it. But it depends on what a lot of people do over the next few days. So that's the situation on the Texas border. Why am I mentioning this in a Ukraine update? Well, it's because Mitch McConnell has raised some doubts whether they'll be able to go ahead with a Ukraine and border security deal, saying the politics of this have changed and that Donald Trump wants to run on immigration. We are in a quandary, he says. So that now puts Ukraine aid from the United States into a tough spot right there. The Republicans had tied border security with Ukraine aid. Now the Republicans are fighting against the deal that is currently being negotiated, and it is still under negotiation, that would have set up the big change in border policy. But overall, the reason this is of concern is because apparently Donald Trump has said that he wants to run on this issue, and therefore any deal in this regard should not be carried out. And he's supported by Speaker Mike Johnson of the House, who has said that any attempt to forward this legislation will be dead on arrival in the U.S. House. So since they've tied the two together, Ukraine aid then is now quite thoroughly up in the air. Is it dead? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not going to predict that at this time, or at least not in this video. The key here is to inform you about what's going on and why U.S. aid is being delayed even further in this situation. So that's everything about Texas and the situation down there on the border. That kind of should get you up to speed. A lot of concerning things going on there, and I will be watching that very closely over the next while. I may do some separate videos that are not Ukraine aid related that talk about the situation at a later date. But this directly impacts on Ukraine, so that's why I talked about it. Let's go ahead and move on to a drone strike that occurred over in Ilovaisk. Ukrainian armed forces carried out an attack on a military training ground in occupied Ilovaisk. There are dead and wounded. In fact, 24 dead is what the number I had reported. But the interesting thing is that these were drone operators of the Russian military that were there for a training class. Kind of an update situation type thing. They managed to likely put a HIMARS missile right in the middle of it and killed multiple drone operating servicemen of the Russian Federation. There is footage. It's kind of blurred out and can't see much. I'm just going to pause it for now, though. And they were doing a lot of testing, and they call it exams, preparing for more drone operations. And this was kind of their drone training center in the area. The Russians have confirmed overall the situation. They're not being specific. They're being tight-lipped about exactly the details. But overall, we can tell that the Russians have lost some pretty vital people here, and it's something to keep in mind. A report on the 24 there. The pro-Russian Romanov disclosed in one post that a group of Russian drone operators got a visit from a HIMARS missile. And the reason it happened is because the commander of the drone operators disclosed their positions through a bot. Tindar assumes it's a Telegram bot where somebody else was listening as well. And since this happened over in Russian-occupied Donetsk, it did not go well for the drone operators that happened to be sharing a little too much information on social media. Maybe Budanov was listening in. Now let's move over to news out of Ukraine. By the way, before I continue on, I just want to point out that if you are logging in and saying hello, please let me know in the chat so I can say hello to you as well and acknowledge you're here. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in. Let's go ahead and continue on. Data Park, a Ukrainian data center, was hacked. Hackers leaked the customer database, including password hashes. Now, there's no real information on what this data center particularly did that would make it an important or strategic target. Overall, though, password hashes can eventually be cracked, as I understand it. It's just a matter of going through the whole situation. There's a lot of things going on there, and it's interesting, though not necessarily a vital security interest until somebody puts out exactly what might have been on those servers. A Russian first-person view drone struck a UN agency volunteer's vehicle, which was clearly marked with UN symbols indicating it's on a humanitarian mission. The overall situation, I mean, you can see here that there's a lot of damage to the humanitarian aid. Some of it was even burning. He did manage to get it out, and I suspect that since the damage appears to have been restricted to the back of the vehicle, that the vehicle itself may still be drivable. At least I've driven vehicles in worse condition than this, and perchance it might be okay in that regard. There's no indications that there was enough damage, say, through the bed of the vehicle to actually penetrate a gas tank. And most of the damage appears to have been restricted to the bed of the vehicle, not the actual passenger compartment. Still, this is food, medical supplies, stuff for civilians. This isn't a military target. It is a marked humanitarian object that should not have been attacked by a drone. The Kyiv Independent adds that these were humanitarian aid for locals, and that it was witnessed by journalists of Ukrainska Pravda media outlet. The Ukrainian Infrastructure Ministry says that a new water pipeline is 95% ready. This is to provide drinking water to some of the oblasts that lost direct access to it after Russia's destruction of Novakovka Dam. The building of the pipeline just one more aspect that allows Ukraine to continue moving forward and actually to improve its situation overall. In that same vein, since Russia refuses to leave Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Ukraine is going to build 4 new nuclear reactors in 2024 to make up for the difference. Now, that's to start the construction, so I can't imagine they'd be operational that quickly. But overall, that's still a good start for Ukraine to continue moving forward and to be able to overcome some of the challenges that Russia has put upon them. A bit of good news: Ukraine is now allowed to bring your pets and stay in shelters with your pets during air raids. One of the challenges, of course, especially early and into the midsection of this war here, has been that pets have not been allowed into the shelters. Now you can actually bring your furry friends along with you, and it's just one more sign that the Ukraine continues to take good care of their furry friends. A new underwater drone project is being put together as part of the Fury project, which stands for apparently First Ukrainian Robotic Navy. These pictures are just interesting. I mean, it's basically a miniature submarine, and they talk about something that I was been kind of advocating for unofficially for a while. That is torpedoes on these drones. A torpedo can be loaded on, and you can still put a large payload on the ship itself. So you could, as you're making your attack run, you could start launching a couple of torpedoes, and that, even if they don't hit, could pin the ship that you're targeting into the area between those two torpedoes to prevent it from actually escaping. Then you could go in with the big payload afterwards. Either way, still an interesting thing. They could carry torpedoes, mines, or missiles. They can be used for strike or reconnaissance operations. More signs that Ukrainian drones are being outfitted with artificial intelligence systems that allow them to identify Russian targets autonomously and attack them. I have mixed feelings about artificial intelligence in warfare, and I'm sure some of that's just from watching a few too many sci-fi movies. But overall, the fact is that AI is going to be integrated into many of our weapons for the years to come. And we're going to have to figure out how to do it and do it well, or we're going to be dealing with our own weapons in other ways. Hopefully, it doesn't make a mistake. That's my concern. And this is an interesting video. I'm going to kind of just play it. It's 2.5 minutes long. But the really interesting part is you can watch this ground drone continuing over apparently 4 kilometers behind enemy lines and blowing up a bridge. Now, I watched the video all the way through. I'm not sure if we'll get all the way through it in this playthrough. The drone is seen moving and being monitored by an aerial drone following it. But this is the type of equipment that Ukraine is fielding now, these types of drones that can be moved long distances behind the front lines and used to attack targets. In this case, it attacked a small, looked like a bridge over a drainage canal, basically, or something along those lines. The thing is, the video does not show the effects of the attack. You can see a very impressive explosion, and it does look very like it's very good. But there's also indications that a lot of the blast may have been absorbed by the roadbed of the bridge. Does that mean that it's destroyed, or maybe it's just so undermined it can't be used for its effective operational use? I don't know, because they didn't show at the end of the video the actual results of the attack. Let's see, it's about 40 more seconds here. That's the bridge that they put it underneath. It seems like this arrangement, I mean, it should be relatively easy to bypass as long as it's not muddy. But the drone goes in there, and you can see the explosions in just a moment here. That seems like it would be pretty thick, and it may not be quite as affected by this. But that is a big explosion. And it looks like the roadbed was still intact at the end. Was it undermined sufficiently to prevent it from being used? Maybe for heavier equipment. That's a possibility. Or it may, in fact, collapse as over the next few minutes, but there's no way to tell from the video provided. And that's the news out of Ukraine. If you're just joining me, please feel free to chime in. Let me know that you're here. Let's go ahead and continue on. Military intelligence. Now, this is about the IL-76 that crashed over near Belgorod. Russia is currently refusing international commission. In other words, they don't want any international people looking at what happened with this IL-76. Hi, Robert. I'm glad to see you aboard. Thank you very much for joining me. I did notice I do have your email. I have not read it just yet. I saw it come in on my phone here earlier today, but I will read it and get back to you. Anyway, IL-76. They're not letting any international people get involved in it at all. Now, they have given over a list of supposed crash victims. The only bodies that have been seen so far have been the crew of the vehicle itself. But this list that they handed over of POWs had a whole lot of people that were already exchanged and therefore could not be in Russia's possession at that point. So the list is obviously bogus, or at least incorrect. Now, they still haven't provided any proof that there were actual POWs on this aircraft yet. If they did, it would be interesting, especially since it should have been easy to provide that evidence within the first hours. If it takes 3 days to get the evidence together, that should tell you how accurate that evidence is. They did publish the list of crew members on that IL-76. News before emails. Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. The crew members were Ship Commander Stanislav Bezubkin, Assistant Ship Commander Vladislav Shmerev, Navigator Alexei Vysokin, thank you, Flight Engineer Andrei Piloev, Flight Technician Sergei Zitanev, and Flight Radio Operator Igor Sablinsky. Now, this at least acknowledges the crew members that were on board. And so far, that's the only people we've actually seen evidence of having perished on board were the crew. Interestingly enough, Ukrainian intelligence says that senior Russian officials were supposed to be on that flight, but did not get on board. According to the Kyiv Independent, high Russian officials were supposed to be on board the aircraft, but the FSB did not allow them to board at the last moment. According to Andrei Yusov, Ukraine's military intelligence spokesperson. Interesting, very interesting if true. And if they had allowed high-ranking members of the military to be on board for this, that would certainly be an interesting comment on exactly what was on board that aircraft. According to Andrei Yusov, Russia was supposed to provide information to the International Committee of the Red Cross about Ukrainian prisoners of war who were allegedly on the military plane, but has not done so yet. Again, this should be an easy, if it's true, it should be an easy win for Russia. Win's not the right word, but an easy task for Russia to provide that information. I don't get the feeling that what Russia's saying is even close to true. Both Ukrainian and Russian authorities have opened criminal investigations into this military transport aircraft crash in Belgorod. The thing is that Russia's already made their Ministry of Emergency Situations bail out of the scene, and it's entirely under military control, which is, of course, concerning because that would give them plenty of opportunity to plant evidence. Yeah, it does sound like they were tipped off, and Russia's claimed a couple of times, kind of from other things I've seen, that they let Ukraine know 15 minutes in advance that they were taking off with this plane full of POWs. But the evidence doesn't support that. The plane flew from Iran earlier the same day. It was probably carrying weapons. When it took off, it was headed away from Ukraine, not towards Ukraine, where it would be going for a prisoner swap. All the details line up for this being something other than a prisoner swap airplane. That's all I can say. The Ministry of Defense of the UK talks about the heating situations and the breakdowns in the 16 locations across Russia that's been amidst the sub-freezing temperatures, and they basically just shows that Russia infrastructure is falling apart. A lot of it from corruption, in fact, most of it. But most of it is just old. It's, these heating systems have been around for 50, 60, 70 years. This also shows that Russia has been prioritizing military spending over their public infrastructure. This will continue to make bigger burdens on the Russian people to support the ongoing military operation. If you are a Russian convict that signed up to go to the special military operation on behalf of Russia, you will no longer be receiving a pardon for fighting in Ukraine. They will not even get necessarily the full promised payments for fighting in Ukraine. I'm not even surprised in the slightest that Russia would go back on this one. Interesting to see him at least make it public now. Now, there was a report that earlier today there would be LTE, that would be a cellular standard, would be turned off for 5 days at night on the mobile internet of all the telecom operators in the SCOF region. Interestingly, that's from January 25th to January 30th, from 2300 to 0600. This seems odd. Number one, it'd be hard to coordinate amongst all the telecom operators throughout an entire region. So why would they do this, and what are they trying to accomplish here? Well, according to Forbes, the real reason may differ from what the Russians say. Shocker. They were supposed to do this to technical work to reconfigure the radio frequency spectrum of transmitting equipment. However, in some foreign countries, when allocating radio frequency bands for the construction of 5G networks, an approach is used in which frequencies are allocated for civilian purposes. However, if the military needs to use them, the range allocated for civilian purposes must be released for the duration of its use for military purposes. So, there could be a military purpose in this same frequency range that Russia is trying to release the spectrum for. No idea what it is, But everything has to be looked at with a very careful eye when it comes to Russia. 40%, 47% of industrial enterprises in the Russian Federation experience a shortage of qualified personnel. I can't imagine where they'd be. Maybe in the military, dying in Ukraine. That's Russia's really stripping they're stripping their best, their brightest, and their future in order to prosecute this military operation, this war. And I think I should just refer to it as a war. I usually say that sarcastically. So they are literally stripping an entire generation to wage this war on Ukraine. It's heartbreaking is what it is, and Ukraine is paying the price in its generation, its future. Russia's actually gotten to the point where they're saying, I kid you not, I saw this today. Russian propagandists are saying that men need to sneak up on their women and get them pregnant, so that in 9 months we're filling all the maternity wards, and then do it again in the next year. They want 10,000 new children born because men snuck up on their women. That's absurd. That's if people are happy in a place, if you build a country that people want to be in, people will bring children into that country. So Russia is basically saying, do your patriotic duty to make children, rather than saying, here's a wonderful place to have children. Why don't you have some children here? The Tuapse refinery situation is getting worse for Russia. It's now been shut down and is no longer refining petroleum products after attacks by Ukrainian drones. They will not be able to repair this plant in any kind of fast order, at least till the end of February and the beginning of March. Now, this seems to be part of a larger pattern of Ukraine attacking Russia's oil exports and their ability to manufacture and refine oil. Oil's a vital resource in any wartime effort these days. You needed to get your tanks to the battlefield. You needed to get your supplies to the battlefield. You need to get your planes in the air. Oil is a vital resource and a war resource. So the destruction of a country's oil infrastructure is part of a war. Anton Herashchenko kind of reviewed all of the burning oil depots since the beginning of 2024, including the explosion at Nizhny Tagil on railroad tracks near that station. That did minimal damage, though it was an explosion that caused a lot of issues. The Oriol region on the 9th, drone debris on the territory of Petersburg Oil Terminal in Leningrad region on the 18th. A small drone caused a large-scale fire at an oil depot in Bryansk on the 19th. And it took, looks like there was 3,100 tons of oil products burnt. Then there was Ust-Luga, happened just the other day. 2 explosions there. And then, of course, the Tuapse oil refinery in Krasnodar. Ukraine is focusing on this industry. This is how Russia brings in money, and this is how Russia powers its war effort, is through oil. So they're hitting it where it hurts. And it's a change. It really is a change in how Ukraine has been waging this war. Funny how when all of a sudden the Western powers are no longer providing that aid, well, that kind of unties Ukraine's hands. They can do what they want with the weapons they build. Residents of Russian Samara are complaining that there are empty shelves in the supermarkets. No eggs, no chicken meat, as well no vegetables or fruits. They are claiming it's due to heavy snows, but that's a week ago. They should be able to get supplies in since then. And that's everything out of Russia itself. Let's go ahead and move over to the international front. According to Kuleba, that's the Ukrainian prime minister, no delays are expected in delivery of the first F-16s from Denmark to Ukraine. Everything's still on schedule. So that's good news for Ukraine. Denmark has opened a new embassy office in Mykolaiv. This is in addition to the embassy in Kyiv, but that's because they've actually made a special operation to and a special responsibility to reconstruct Mykolaiv. They're taking personal responsibility and trying to provide that support for that specific city, and that's a really interesting ad for them. Good on Denmark for putting their money and their people where their mouths are. France transferred 2 additional M270 LRU rocket launchers to Ukraine. These are basically HIMARS on tracks. They can carry double the number of missiles. Really good equipment, and the only reason they're not as popular is because M270 doesn't roll off the tongue like HIMARS does. Ukrainian surveillance cameras are sending data to Chinese manufacturers. That says hundreds of thousands of surveillance cameras, according to the Kyiv Independent, that are used in Ukraine transmit information to servers in Chinese state-linked manufacturers. That's a security hole that they're going to want to keep close eye on, especially considering China has been a buddy-buddy with Russia all throughout this conflict. Ukraine is willing to move part of its drone production to Lithuania. This would be a great move both for Lithuania and Ukraine. Ukraine could certainly use the facilities, and the truth is, I don't think they're going to move anything, but they will be probably providing the knowledge and capabilities and guiding them through setting up the necessary construction equipment and factories so that drones can be produced in Lithuania. They keep their full speed production in Ukraine. They have additional production happening in Lithuania. Everybody wins. Hungary has been an interesting character throughout this entire situation. They have been on Putin's side through pretty much everything, right up until the EU started saying, look, we're going to take away your voting rights if you keep acting like a Russian stooge. So Hungary has now said they will no longer oppose new EU weapons funding for Ukraine. Germany I'm not sure how else to put this. They're cutting a deal with France and Britain, saying, we'll send you Taurus missiles so you can send more of your Scalp and Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. It's an indirect way to get more missiles to Ukraine. It's just an indication there is not the political will on the part of Olaf Scholz to actually drive that commentary. It also puts the lie to the thought that they can't spare the missiles. A Russian jet crashed in Afghanistan. This is a private plane here. And it's reported that when the Taliban showed up, they made off with $1.2 million. This private jet was a part of apparently one of the Russian oil company's private jet. And the whole situation there is a little bit shaky on exactly what happened, how it happened, and why they were down there in Afghanistan in the first place. A Croatian court has decided that Medvedchuk's personal yacht will be sent to Ukraine to do what they will with. The odds are they're going to sell it and use that money to buy more weapons, because that's what they really need. Still, Medvedchuk was the Kremlin's handpicked man to take over Kyiv should Russia manage to take over the country. Basically, their stooge. The interesting part of this is that this is just one more way that the international community is finding to punish those who are responsible for the attack on Ukraine. While not directly related to the war, I'm bringing this up in the same vein as I brought up Texas earlier. And that is that North Korea has tested a new strategic cruise missile, according to state media. Where did they get the technology for this new cruise missile? Bet you that if we looked carefully, we'd find the plans had a whole lot of Russian on them. But North Korea has managed to create this new strategic cruise missile to threaten more of the world with their nuclear warheads. And as they do so, it's clear that they're still sending even more weapons to Russia so that Russia can continue to prosecute the war. Imagine having to ask North Korea to help you out because you couldn't produce enough for your own war, the one you started. Nepal has asked Russia to stop recruiting Nepali citizens for their war in Ukraine and to return the hundreds of Nepalis that have been sent there already. The EU is reportedly preparing to reject the renewal of a crucial Ukraine gas pipeline deal with Russia set to expire this year. That's interesting because two countries in particular, like Austria and Slovakia, still heavily rely on Russian gas. But the EU believes that replacement supplies can be found, and therefore it won't be that big of an issue. This is just one more way that the EU is trying to stop money from flowing to Russia. Speaking of Slovakia, there have been mass demonstrations against the pro-Russian government that's been installed over there. This has been going on for over a week now and continues to grow, which should tell you that people who've been under Russian rule really don't want to go back under Russian rule. Just kind of a quick summary of the things that the Russian Ministry of Defense will be sending to Ukraine in 2024, including IRIS-T air defense systems, Gepard Spags, additional artillery systems with ammunition, and 80 Leopard 1A5 MBTs. My understanding is that the Leopard 1A5 has really been pretty popular over in Ukraine. The 105 millimeter gun is still firing modern ammunition. It may be an older tank, but it still has really good thermals with a good, I think it's a 2 kilometer identification range on them so they can see and identify a target. Overall, the 1A5 was a good tank. Just because it's got a slightly smaller gun than the modern ones does not mean it's not still good for all the amazing things that they do on the battlefield, including, let me see if I can find it real quick here. Firing the 105 millimeter M1040 canister rounds. That's basically making the 105 millimeter shotgun that fires several hundred tungsten balls, which you can kind of see the effects of on this training range. In case the YouTube censors happen to watch, this is a training range with them practicing with the ammunition. Look at that spread. You could take out a huge amount of infantry with that kind of canister shot. All right, let's see. Where was I? Perfect. NATO has announced a new exercise, Steadfast Defender 24, which is the largest NATO exercise since the Cold War has ended. 90,000 service members, 50 naval assets, 150 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, and 400 armored personnel carriers will participate. This is a massive exercise, and it's obviously intended to communicate the West's ability to respond in the event that Russia gets a little too big for its britches elsewhere in Europe. And ending out the international part right here, Germany has uncovered a Russian disinformation campaign on X/Twitter, depending on how you want to call it these days. Basically, they're trying to stir up anger against Berlin's supporters of Ukraine over on Twitter, and it's getting increasingly sophisticated as they do so. This is not so much a surprise for anybody who's been paying attention to social media, but the fact that Germany has actually uncovered it and is working on countering it is the real news on this one. And that's kind of the situation on the international front. We'll take a brief pause here just to say thank you again for joining me today. If you're just joining us now, go ahead and chime in. Let me know that you're here. And if you have any questions, absolutely pop in and ask them at any point in time. Let's go ahead and move on to the front lines. There's been the first actual physical evidence of Russia using poisonous substances in their grenades. The RGVO grenades that they're using use chloroacetophenone, which I believe is a tear gas or irritant, but they have upped the concentration and the amount to the point where it could be potentially lethal within 5 minutes of exposure. This is just This is effectively chemical warfare on small scale. And this should be one of those many red lines that should have been drawn in the sand that should have resulted in an absolutely overwhelming response. But what are we going to do now? They actually talk about these grenades in this presentation. They say that there is one that's just an irritant that's used for crowd control. It's obviously a much weaker version of it. But if they can get one of these grenades into, say, a dugout or something like that, it would effectively make the situation in there unlivable for the soldiers inside. There were some explosions reported earlier today in occupied Skadovsk. This is one of the areas where Russians tend to do a lot of their training, which makes it interesting, and I'd love to see if we can find more information on this later. Now let's go ahead and move on to the front lines real quick here. There's not been a lot of changes, but there are a couple of interesting ones. Just kind of a quick rundown around the horn here. No real changes in Kupiansk for a while. There's still fighting going on, and it's still being reported. The Russians have been losing a tremendous amount of equipment there. But no changes to the front lines in quite some time now. No changes near Bakhmut, although I did see something about the Russians potentially taking another trench line there. That's kind of shaky on accuracy, but it's something to watch for. There are some changes near Avdiivka. I'll address those in a little bit here. And some changes near Verbova. Let's go ahead and get into the Verbova area here. This is right here is yesterday's lines, and this is today's. You can see that Ukraine managed to advance another tree line here and move closer to Verbova. This should indicate that Ukraine is actually on the offensive again, at least at the small scale where they have the opportunities. This is also the area where Russia was reported just about a month ago to have a significant force still fighting right along in this area. So to have Ukraine take this territory back should tell you that the Russians are either having troubles here or are having to pull back. The other area that was interesting was an area that was just listed as a frontline update on Turney. You can see this is yesterday's lines. Here's today's. Indicates that Ukraine has moved forward a bit, but when they put these things in as just frontline updates, that usually means that this is older information that they're just catching up on. The situation in Krinky is really interesting. Apparently, Russia managed to retake some of the center of Krinky over the last week or 2 weeks, but the situation, as Knoll Report states, remains dynamic. The weather there is particularly challenging, but the interesting part to me is that Ukraine apparently has expanded their front right here into the tree line and into the forested area here. This could give them some real opportunities, assuming the Russians are not able to staff and fortify this area significantly at this point. And the Avdiivka situation here, this is about the best map I've found, showing the small advance by Russian forces, kind of on the south end. This is it puts, I believe this is the industrial area, pretty firmly under Russia's control. That said, these lines are troubling to me as an amateur, obviously not a professional in the area of warfare. This looks like they are overextending their ability to defend this area. All Ukraine would have to do is get a significant force right here, cut this off from resupply, and starve them right back out. At least to my non-professional, my amateur eyes, that's my concern there. If there's anybody who has insights onto this situation on the southeast end of Avdiivka, absolutely let me know in the comments. I would love to have a little bit more information on this one. Overall, though, Avdiivka doesn't really change much. Stepova is now solidly in the gray zone these days, meaning it's an area where a lot of fighting is going on and no clear person fully in charge. Let's go ahead and move on to the interesting extras here. I'll go and rewind this thing back. This is another Ukrainian ground drone that's laying out a barrier of TM62 mines. Literally, they've tied them together at not quite static intervals, and they're just dragging out the entire line to set these mines. They're not burying them. They're not doing anything special to conceal them. They just stretch them out into a long line. That means that they can't just drive a tank through the area because they're going to hit these mines. Really interesting. Now, I mentioned in the previous video about the kerfuffle over in Britain about the perfect cup of tea. Well, somebody's been stirring the pot a little bit, so they asked for the U.S. Embassy in Australia for a statement on Vegemite etiquette. The U.S. Embassy in Australia said to avoid further saltiness between AUKUS partners. We will not be commenting on Vegemite at this time, except to say the U.S. Embassy will continue to eat Vegemite in the proper way, as taught by our Australian friends by the spoonful. Oh, gee. I'm pretty sure they like their Vegemite on buttered toast, not by the spoonful, but I am not Australian. I just love the way that there's just that every once in a while these people have to get a little bit of the lighter side of their job out there, have some fun, and these are not real controversies, but all the fun still the same. So I already talked about that one. Okay, I already talked about that as well. So perfect. That's everything for today. If you thank you again for joining me. If you have any questions, be sure to comment in the video after everything gets shut down. I will be watching for your comments. I do appreciate them very much, and I want you to know that I appreciate you very much as well. And on that note, you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.